Welcome to Theory of Change. My name is Benjamin Ulrich. I'm your host. And on this podcast, I interview guests and thought leaders and experts on their personal theory of change, how they are bringing about impact and change in this world from a capital perspective, from a technological perspective, from a societal perspective. We're going to be sitting at the intersections of many different disciplines, and we're going to try to have a intellectual global macro lens. Today, my very first guest on this podcast is Peter Fusaro, founder of the Wallstreet Summit. Peter does not need an introduction to those working in the sustainable finance sector in clean tech and decarbonization and energy transition. And Peter is a powerhouse. He's mentored hundreds and hundreds of students. And we're going to talk about mental health, the next generation of change makers. And I wish you a great time with Peter, and thank you for joining in. And until next time, be well. I would say, let's start like this. For the people who are in sustainable finance, you must be a household name. Like everybody would know you. There's no need to introduce you. However, I am somebody who just recently met you, and I would love to hear it from you, first person account of who are you and what is your mission, and then I'm so excited to start into our conversation today.
Sure. So my name is Peter Fusaro. I'm founder of the Wallstreet Green Summit, which is now in its 25th year, the oldest sustainable finance event in North America. It's every March in New York. However, my journey beginning as an environmentalist began as a child. I used to play in the woods with a duck pond and a stream and frogs and turtles right next to where I lived. And so that DNA sort of got into my system. So I was at the first Earth Day 1970, that's 56 years ago. And my entire professional career has been driven by sustainability before it had any names. It wasn't called green, it wasn't called sustainability, it wasn't called anything. And it was really the beginning of the environmental movement in the United States, which began in California, predating 1970s Clean Air, Clean Water Act. But then the movement expanded, and my journey has been very focused on the energy industry, the people doing the damage. The energy industry is 73% of greenhouse gas emissions. That's almost 3/4. And I've been very effective there. I helped get the lead out of gasoline with EPA. And now today in the world, there is no lead in gasoline, which really impacted children's health. I set up the first energy efficiency programs in New York City with the two utilities. I worked on the Prius with Toyota. I've done really big projects that had impact. But I also decided almost 30 years ago that talking about climate change scares people. So I stopped scaring people. And I've made a concerted effort to mentor more young people. So I was on the board of the University of Michigan's Urb Institute for Global Sustainable Enterprise for 8 years, on the board of Bard College's MBA in Sustainability for 5 years. I was a professor at Columbia University teaching renewable energy project finance to second-year grad students. And then I've lectured at about 20 universities around the world: MIT, Yale, Penn, Carnegie Mellon, University of Chicago, London Business School, Oxford, etc. So I made a concerted effort and decided we can't make an economic transformation to sustainability without young people. It's as simple as that. We need young people. And so I have mentored over 300, mostly young women, in sustainable finance for almost the last 30 years. I'm still mentoring people. I met with one of my interns a couple of nights ago. He's going back to India, and he drank the Kool-Aid. He's a wonderful kid, 32 years old, and he's very mission driven also. So many years ago, I met with a hedge fund manager. He looks at me and says, "You're mission driven." I said, "Well, yeah, I guess I am. But the mission is global. I've been to 50 countries. I've seen horrific poverty. I've seen horrific pollution. And I just think we can make the world a better place by working together. And that's knowledge. I've written 17 books. I've done 2,000 talks, speeches, podcasts, etc., 700 articles. I mean, I'm a little bit of a nut that no one would have that quantity of work. And more recently, I had a book idea almost 20 years ago. The book was going to be called We Are the Endangered Species. Long story short, the publishers rejected it. They didn't want to touch that. So a couple of weeks ago, I started playing around with AI, and I am going to do another book. And it's going to be called We Are the Endangered Species. But when I wrote the bestseller, it wasn't a book for professionals. It was a book for everybody. Everybody could read What Went Wrong at Enron. I used to call it an airplane read. So I have the same idea because I think in the environmental movement, we're too siloed. People use a lot of jargon. They don't understand what you're talking about. People need to communicate better. And in the last 2.5 years, I've actually turned my speeches into storytelling. I just tell stories now. I tell stories about carbon markets. I tell stories about clean tech 1.0. I tell stories about climate tech now. Because I think when you make it very familiar to people, it's not as threatening. They can understand it. I've had translators in many countries, Japan, Poland, where I've had simultaneous translations. Some of my books are in Hindi, French, Italian, etc. So my game is communication. I mean, and convening. So what I do now is once a year, I have an event. We've had 9,000 people come to this event. It's a small event, 150 people in New York, but it's people doing the work. People working on things like replacing meat with mushrooms. I'm not even making that up. Or people looking at how to protect the oceans. I have a woman coming in who created the Sustainable Oceans Alliance. She was very young and kind of poo-pooed at the UN and went and did her own thing. And she's an amazing young woman. Like I said, I'm very fond of young people. And my joke is I have a call option on young people. That means in the money. And so I just think that, and this year there's so much despair that people are not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. They're not seeing that the world is moving forward on sustainability. They're listening to press releases, bad news, poor politics, and don't understand this is a very long-term trend. This is not short-term. You have to think very long-term to really make substantive change. So from 1970 now to 2026, I've been working this path. This is what I do. I like doing it. People, even the last week, people are showing me new technologies. People are showing me things they're up to. And I look at a lot of things. I'm very curious and I'm open. There's no barrier to entry. And it's usually through LinkedIn, which has now become a conduit for everything. And people, I don't think Microsoft understands LinkedIn, to be honest with you. It's an amazing channel for communication. And the bottom line, though, about sustainability is human health and welfare. So now I'm going to segue into the real. So it's very important that we treat people with respect and kindness. And Sean Lesser, who's a tremendous gentleman, I've known him over 20 years from the impact investing world, came to me over Christmas. He said, well, would you like to join the real? I said, okay, sure. I mentor people. So I thought it was about mentorship. And I hope it is about mentorship. And maybe you'd like to share your thoughts on the real as well.
Yes, yes. What a pleasure. So to give our audience a bit of context and a container, Sean Lesser, who you mentioned, is a former impact investment banker. And he, by his own accounts, one day, through I mean, it's been piling up, but his mental health, and he ended up in a place where his mental health kind of shut down, and he ended up in a psych ward. So you have this gentleman who, as far as I know, understands everything about the capital markets. He's so good with people. He's organized thousands of events, and there he is, and his brain or his body is just shutting down. And where do you turn to? at that point, that's what Sean told us. He and his wife didn't have another option but to opt for the psychiatric ward. And later on, he realized that was not what he needed. What he needed was simply someone to talk to, someone who would listen, and then maybe someone who would understand. And then that would be sort of this gradual, low level, low friction entry point into discussing how you feel. Let's say as a man, not to say that women are excluded. We are all human species. We're families. We're a community. But I just heard someone else, and I hear this often. People tell me, Benjamin, this is so good that you're doing this as an ambassador for the Real Mental Health Foundation, because men generally swallow up so much. They're not used to sharing their feelings. They may not even know their feelings. And it creates all sorts of problems for them. So and to give you a little bit of context about my life, I grew up in a sort of whirlwind family. Things were shiny on the outside, like on the surface, but if you go into the deep tissue, there was a lot of underlying dynamics that nobody addressed. And at the age of 14, I would have symptoms that I would notice in myself, to the point where at 18, I was like mildly suicidal, suicidally depressive, substance abuse, difficult relationships. And so I got out of that, and I would, like, couple years ago, start talking about it on LinkedIn. And I think the algorithm just caught my interest in the capital markets and being a connector of people, like convening and communication and mental health and capital. And that's when the LinkedIn algorithm started to send me Sean Lesser. And and a couple months later, I'm an executive ambassador with the Real Mental Health Foundation. I was speaking at the Mental Health Summit in Davos, and I'm bringing new people to the pack. And I'm going to travel to Montreal, and I'm reaching out to different investor networks. See, like, hey, would you like to we can just have a chat about what you're up to, what I'm up to. And, then I have these pockets of VCs that are looking for funding in the brain and mental health and NGO type of work. And so I'm going to pass the ball back to you, knowing that maybe you can share a little bit about like, we can talk about the real, and we can go back to, because I just checked on your LinkedIn and you have a capital intro vehicle that you're just starting. So I have prepared a bunch of questions from what I would like to be a global intellectual macro lens, like a historical intellectual macro lens for decision makers, for investors, to see what has changed, because you have a unique lens. Like, who in the world has 50 years, an entire life, that they can look back on and kind of share with us on sustainability? And at your own discretion, feel free to fuse it with mental health and community. You mentioned your father saying it's heavy lifting, and if we want to kind of change the trajectory of the planet and the human species, I really want to sit on top, the 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 highest bird's eye view possible. If you could take us there for a moment and let us see what you're seeing, and then we can land the conversation in half an hour or 40 minutes, and see what we can inspire people to take action on.
Yeah, well, my biggest value is hope. I mean, what gets me up in the morning. It's very important that people are hopeful and not despondent and not depressed and not destroying themselves with substance or whatever. So I think hope is a very important value for me. And so what I've done is taken that channel to others. So I freely meet with people constantly in New York, one at a time. Not a lot of people, one at a time. They reach out, they want to talk, they want career guidance, or they're having problems. And so when Sean Lesser came to me, I said, well, this is what I've been doing. I mean, I did it volitionally, specifically to get more human capital into sustainability. But as you see young people progress in their careers, you want them to succeed. So some have been highly successful. One is the co-manager of the World Bank a Disruptive Technology Fund. One came out of BlackRock. He's now running a forestry fund. I'm seeing the give back. And when I taught at Columbia, now some of my former students are teaching at Columbia. So I look at, it's not a circular economy, it's a circular world. I look at things interconnected. Everything's interconnected. People tend to be very siloed. My advanced degree, well, my undergraduate degree was a math history double major. Didn't make any sense at all at Carnegie Mellon. And so I've always been very internationally focused. So I went and had an international relations degree because I've been to 50 countries, because I've seen the good side of the world and the bad side of the world. And the game really is lifting all boats. I'm now in dialogue with a gentleman in India that has something called Green Mentors. I have a call with him on Tuesday. I've never heard of Green Mentors before, but he's got 50,000 universities involved. So the game is to elevate, to lift all the boats, not leave people behind. And I have a very simple trinity for the world: energy, food, and water. These are the world's largest businesses, and these are the ones that have to be transformed into sustainable enterprises, because we can't consume at the level we've been consuming, particularly the developed world. So he was talking about the global south. Like I said, I've been to both very elegant places and very horrific places. I've been to Haiti. I've been to India. I've seen people suffering, and it's pretty, and I'm just very aware. I mean, a lot of people don't look at things that don't see them. I'm the opposite. I see things, and then I see things people don't see. And that's when I started writing the books and the messaging, because I started on climate change 36 years ago, and no one really wanted to talk about it. And on the change in the environment, I'll just give you an example. There's a correlation of infectious disease and climate change. Nobody wants to talk about that. I worked with Harvard Medical College almost 25 years ago, and this is epidemiologists, this is data, these are studies. Disease that was eradicated, the hantavirus, diphtheria, started reappearing in the 90s because of warming of the planet. So it's insect-borne, water-borne. So during COVID, I tried to message that this was not a one-off, that there was going to be other incidents of infectious disease. People don't want to hear that message. At my conference, I have found the first fund manager in the world that I've ever found who's devoting part of her fund to healthcare related to climate. I've never seen anybody do that. And she invited me to a dinner at the Penn Club in New York, hit it off. I said, you're doing something that no one's doing. 2% of resources are devoted to human health. And I'd like to expand that. That includes mental health. So it's really healthcare we're talking about. And so, you know, I'm kind of an icon in this global industry. My name is known everywhere, but it's not good enough being one voice. You need a choir. You need a cathedral. I was watching the Olympics. That Milan Cathedral holds 40,000 people. I've been there to the Duomo, could not believe that. So we need a big tent. So I think education's part of that. Sharing is part of that. And caring is a big part of that. You know, Wall Street is very misaligned this way because it's about the edge, it's about the arb, it's about getting ahead. But when we're talking about human beings, we're pretty simple critters. And the Earth is 4 billion plus years old, and we've been around 5 million. So we're just another species on the Earth. And I just think with the resources, technology, the intellectual capabilities we have, we could do a lot more. And so I think the better news is what I'm seeing, that people have made a pile of money in the capital markets are now pivoting into sustainability, which that's a very good thing because these are smart people. These are well-heeled people. They have money. They can put money to work, not just through foundations, but also investing in venture, because we have to move the needle. And I'll just give you the number. Last year, sustainable investment was $2.2 trillion globally. That's not that much money. It was up 5%. That's according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. We need to move the needle farther, deploy more capital, and bring better solutions, because the outcome of all of this is human survival, human health and welfare. These are the simple things that most people need. And when disease becomes rampant, when starvation becomes rampant, and the inability to react to this, I went to the Obama administration during the Democratic convention and gave them 10 proposals. 10. They took one, which was retiring, called cash for clunkers, old cars. But my bigger idea was that we should have a civil defense for climate change. We should be proactive. We should be ready for the next pandemic, ready for the next forest fire, ready for when people are starving. And well, obviously that's not working, but we should be more proactive when something is going to get worse, not better. Last year we went through 1.5 degrees C. What does that mean? That means that was the Paris Accord. We just blew through it already. So it's getting more intense. We're warming faster. And there's going to be deleterious effects on the planet through many different means: fires, floods, droughts, fish catch down, ocean warming. I worked with a gentleman in Panama who was trying to grow fish in a warming climate. He was growing capaci. So I look at a lot of things, but we have a lot of work to do. That's the good news. There's lots of work to do. The bad news is there's a dire lack of education on everything I'm talking about. In the last 5 years, I've worked with both Oxford and Stanford universities who have just established sustainability colleges. So academia is a little remiss, a little behind the curve here. The students want this. This is the better news. I think almost everybody under 30, under 40 is very cognizant of sustainability. I've seen it. I've seen people carrying those metal water containers and eating organic food and all kinds of great stuff. So they're there. The problem, here's the disconnect. They're not the ones in power. They're not the ones with the most money, but they are driven. So this is the better news is the economic engine is going to transform. It's just going to, because people like me who are 75 years old, have been doing this forever, are going to be gone. We're going to retire or disappear. And there's legacy, of course, but there's going to be better people that come in. And I'm just extremely hopeful. Like I said before, I wake up in the morning to hope. It should be a hope channel. So, because I just see really great things. Maybe I'm a cockeyed optimist, but I see wonderful people doing amazing things around the world.
One of the thoughts that I had coming into this recording was, and I urge people to listen to your TED Talk 13 years ago. And one of the things that you mentioned was that young people who are now 13 years older, so there's this, let me see that I don't open up too many loops, social media. I was thinking that I spend a fair amount of time on YouTube trying to discover new things, and I'm thinking that virality for youth, and I'm youth defining as maybe 20, 30, I'm 41, and these people are going to enter or have entered the capital markets, as you mentioned in your TED Talk. They have entered the political landscape, but merely. I was talking to, in Davos, the first deputy of the Danish parliament who is advocating for women's mental health. Now imagine that, right? So we're gonna, I think this, the message should also be that young people have hope, that young people work together, and that they become vocal and vote with their feet and vote with their purses, and then the capital can follow. But so on the one hand, I'm thinking I want to encourage people to stand up on social media, create their channels, talk about sustainable finance. I know a few people, maybe I can interview them here, but then there's a lot more room for these young people to come in. And somebody once said, I think it was one of the federal ministers of our government of Switzerland. He was asked when he was head president of the United Nations, was it the Security Council or something like that? And they said, Mr. President, Switzerland is so small. It doesn't have any power. How should we think about this? And then he said, well, we don't have any formal power, like net power, like the States or Russia or China, but we have a lot of influence through the types of agenda points we give people, the angle with which we contribute to the discussion. That is our leverage point. One of the thoughts that crossed my mind, Peter, is why are we not pushing the needle more? Why is there not more capital flowing into the markets, into the technology solutions, so the big utility providers, the big energy companies can start changing everything? Why is this inertia? And one of the reasons that crossed my mind goes back to the real. What is the Real Mental Health Foundation doing as part of its commitment? It wants to destigmatize mental health and mental illness. It wants to create a world where it's normal for a man like me to admit that I'm not feeling too well, that I need help, that I would like to access some sort of resource, some sort of system, some sort of infrastructure. And what I'm thinking is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you go to these business schools, then you become a Wall Street trader, and and it's a taboo to talk about mental health. It's a taboo to talk about your wish that the oceans wouldn't warm up, that the fish don't have to die, that there are not more floods, earlier floods, bigger floods. But there's no blessing from the world, your peers, your boss, your colleagues. They would frown. They're like, "Oh, he's weird." And so in a way, if we can destigmatize, that could maybe allow more people to come in. What are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree with you. It's almost let the light in. Unfortunately, in some instances, the capital markets are extremely toxic. So you know, to have the arbitrage, to have the edge, to do real well, and not care about others. I think the DNA is shifting, and I'm just going to give you some analogs. So I was on the board of an indoor air quality appliance, and another member of the board worked for Gensler, the world's largest architectural firm. He could not hire young architects if they were not doing green buildings. Okay? So they pointed to the Shanghai Tower. What people don't know, Exxon, perceived as this horrible company, is the 10th largest renewable purchaser in the United States. So why are they doing that? For young employees. So I think the DNA of business is shifting. And I think it's taken generations to see the shift. I'm the early bird and I'm the Pied Piper. And people on Wall Street, that's that green guy. A friend of mine, he says, Peter, you and I stick out like sore thumbs. He was another green guy. But it doesn't matter anymore because I'll tell you what's occurred. New York City, where I live, has become the climate tech center of the world. We have a thing called Climate Week, where 100,000 people from all over the world come to New York for a week. 700 events on climate, be it nature-based solutions, water, indigenous peoples, gender. I've just been invited to co-host a thing at the UN with a gentleman out of India. We're going to talk on Tuesday. My game, very simply, is collaboration, not siloing information, sharing, caring. And people are under a lot of distress right now, especially in the United States. I'm out there. I've demonstrated twice at the No Kings marches. And I was in the 60s out in the street, anti-war, women's rights, civil rights, environmental rights. We were out in the street. So a lot of us old timers from the 60s are back because there was an outcome from that. There was clean air and clean water legislation. There were civil rights bills. Women got better rights, and the war ended. So there are outcomes. I think people are misjudging what is the strategy now. So I think we have to form better metrics on how to get things done. And I'm still very optimistic. I bank my hope on young people. I've lectured at probably 25 universities. Now, I don't know how I'm going to deal with 50,000 universities with this Green Mentor program he's established, but it's the same thing. It's sharing knowledge. And that's why I digress into storytelling. Because when you talk about this to young people, what they really want is authenticity. They want the truth. And my career has been very lumpy. There have been times when things didn't happen and took longer than I expected. And now it's the best of all possible worlds, Candide. It's the best. This is the time to make the transformation. It wasn't 50 years ago. It's now. And that's where we're going to see more money come into the sector. I'm getting a lot of calls, where should we invest? And I said, this is not for retail. This is not for retail. These are for accredited investors, high net worth, family offices, strategics, and sovereign wealth. It's for the big dogs because they can move the needle. And I just want to give you another analog. The energy industry thinks in 40-year cycles. They think very long term. So when Trump invades Venezuela and thinks the oil industry wants oil from Venezuela, they don't want oil from Venezuela. I work for Petróleos de Venezuela. That oil is very difficult and very what we call heavy, sour crude. You have to basically almost mine it like the tar sands. So, or we're going to drill in Alaska. We're not going to drill in Alaska. These are very smart engineers. I went to an engineering college, Carnegie Mellon University. I'm not an engineer, but I know how engineers think. Engineers solve problems. And so there's just a lot of misinformation, miscommunication about how transitionally this is working. The companies are consolidating. The companies are cleaning up their balance sheets, and their companies will be the ones on the bleeding edge of new technology because the little guys, the entrepreneurs, the startups will be acquired by the big companies. This is not an IPO market for climate tech. This is a market where big companies have what I call technology scouts. They go out and see all the little companies. So one of my companies I'm on the board of, Power to Hydrogen, makes reversible fuel cells. What are they doing? They're making water on the moon, and I'm not making that up with NASA. I got them into something called Shell Game Changers because I said you have to be aligned with the big strategic because they have resources you don't have. They're doing so well. They're decarbonizing now in Rotterdam, the port of Rotterdam. So what I'm getting at, some of these things take time. There's no instantaneous quick fix. When I worked on the Prius, Toyota would smash up the cars. They smash them up. I don't know how many billions Toyota spent building the Prius, and then the EV, electric vehicle, and then the fuel cell vehicle. And the world's going to have to move to hydrogen at some point. We're not ready for hydrogen, but I've driven hydrogen fuel cell cars, and they make water vapor, no emissions, zero emissions. That's where we got to go. But it's engineering, it's finance, it's technology, but it's human capital. I focus on the human dimension. And this is my takeaway. People want to feel good about themselves, okay? They want to feel they're doing something beneficial. That's the key of sustainability. It is the nicest group of people you're ever going to meet. I make referrals constantly to very senior people from very junior people, and everybody is very accepting and sharing. This is a very different metric. This is something human. The people in the sustainability field are very nice, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, 100%. It goes back to what you said about the real and being human and being kind. And I wanna, if we have a couple of minutes, I would like to come down from the macro lens and maybe shift from 20,000 feet to 15,000 feet. Let's take a young woman in her early 30s. She's an heir to a wealthy entrepreneur, or someone who sold a business or a patent, whatnot. They have a family office. We're talking accredited, sophisticated investors, private equity, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, insurance funds, as you mentioned, maybe VC. But one of the, and you, for the audience to also recapture, you said this is not an IPO market. This is you're selling. If you're a founder listening to this, or an investor in VC, or you're sitting on the sidelines and you're not quite sure, so let's say you invest into one of these companies and they get scouted and then they get bought by a strategic buyer, Exxon Mobil, Shell, and then these energy companies take the responsibility of spreading and scaling the technology across the infrastructure globally. So let's take this young woman and let's say she's kind of, I don't know, maybe she studied arts at McGill in Montreal. My children live there. So let's say she's that woman, and then she's listening to this episode, or she's catching one of your books, or her friend recommends her, and she's like, wow, we gotta do something. What sort of a pathway or multiple pathways for her to enter the field? And I want to address, before you answer, I want to address risk mitigation, because it's something that I understand from a capital perspective. You want to protect the downside first. You got to do your due diligence, and people just don't know about sustainability. They have no exposure to it. What are some of the low hanging fruits, the low friction pathways into sort of becoming a generationally oriented investor for this transition to save the species, let's say, and to promote these hopeful initiatives that you're seeing all around the world?
Well, here's where the universities fall down. I mean, I met during the summer when I was a professor at Columbia with the Career Counseling Office to try to give them some insights, to try to broaden their scope. If you're in the B school, it's not a problem. They've already recruiting by corporations. That's very organized. But in the other colleges, it wasn't. And so, what I've done is I just have a ridiculous referral network of moving people in front of other people so they can get their time with them. Some meet up, some just do Zoom. So there isn't one simple pathway because the universities really have not structured themselves to do much more than teach and then throw them on the sidewalk. They don't really do a good job of bringing that human capital into the markets. Now, at the University of Michigan, we did a very interesting thing. They downsized the size of the program. They made it smaller. Now, this is a dual degree, an MBA in finance, and an MS in School of Natural Resources. And we went from 40 people to 30 people. These folks are very well heeled, and they do these, I'll call them capstones, at corporations or environmental funds. They actually get out into the field and do work. And so that's one way that it opens more doors. They have connectivity. They have something where people come back every year to network. And so one student 5 years later has a job somewhere else, and he's helping or she's helping the next one in. And that's the only way it's going to work, because it's not, the headhunters don't offer any value. I'm just going to be blunt. They move one body from here to another body there, and it's zero sum game. They don't really care about anything but getting their retained fee. That's it. So this is a little different because there's no global anything on sustainability. It is pretty much fixed by site, fixed by jurisdiction, locale. And I'm mentoring a young woman in UCLA. She's an engineer right now, and she wants to get in sustainability. So I'm just doing exactly what I described to you. I'm putting her in front of people. I'm sending her information. I'm getting her to talk. I said, don't ask her for a job. Do an informational interview, because one thing people do like to talk about their jobs. And so, and I'm continuing that. She's from Lebanon, and she's very successful, but they don't like their jobs. That's the key. They're making money and they don't like their jobs. I've seen this happen at Goldman Sachs. I've seen this happen at a hedge fund called Oxif. They just leave. If they're not doing what they want to do, it's their lives. That's why I think sustainability resides in young people. They see it.
Interesting.
It's generational. They embrace it, and they want to work with their values, their alignment of their values.
We'll be right back with our conversation, but first, I want to give a quick shout out to my friend David, who is helping busy parents add an extra 30 to 40 nights at home with their children during those most formative years. It's a message that deeply resonates with me, and creating a meaningful bond with your children requires time together, not just moments of quality, but true presence. And for David, private aviation is the vehicle how he supports you in building your enterprise without sacrificing your child's soccer game or piano recital. And if you would like to have a conversation with David about how private aviation can help you in building your legacy and building relationships with the next generation, contact David on WhatsApp at +1 952 261 5942 or email him at david@integrisaviation.com. Now let's get back into the conversation. It's an interesting thought, and let me come back to it. But I want to first open up a little door that you hinted at, which is universities are just basically starting up their sustainability colleges, and the demand would be there. And then what you are doing is putting people in front of each other. But what's missing is, even on a global scale, an organization that allows for connectivity, for introductions, for summits, for communities, maybe an app or something where you can have a cap stack, you can have the founders stack, you can have the venture, like, so that could be something. Because and now let me come back to what you're describing with the exemplified by your Lebanon mentee and the people leaving Goldman Sachs or the hedge funds, because they can do it. They've been trained to do it. They have the intelligence to do it. They have the grit to do it, but it sucks the soul right out of them. It kills the heart inside of them. And I see a game plan where we allow these young people to become entrepreneuring and open up almost like their own markets. Not a technological market like the internet and then AI, but it's more like this human market where all of a sudden you can talk about mental health, and it opens up a lot of possibilities for people to maybe start businesses around that social trend, that human trend. And then maybe there's businesses that can start around, there's a group of people, they haven't found each other yet, they haven't discovered the verticals and the pathways yet, but if they start meeting together, there's an interesting, the House of TCP in Davos. It's a large family from Asia, and they are trying to connect. They're very strong on sustainability, I would say. And so I could see such a player helping these young people develop these platforms globally, that they work, they are like, they hold. It's not just an idea and then it goes down. As you said, you might see the results 20, 30, 40, 50 years later. That's very cool. I like that.
Well, I'm working with a startup in Italy, in Turin, called Brilliant Ideas Planet. And she is trying to do that for entrepreneurs and education. Now, I'm going to talk to the Green Mentor guy on Tuesday. So if you see what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to cobble together some of what you're talking about because it's falling in my lap. I didn't go searching for this, but people are thinking about how do we work together. I mean, this Brilliant Ideas Planet, the world's best eco-friendly solutions and experts in one place. So it's dialing in. I tried to do this 20 years ago. I was building a a site called Echo Commerce, but once again, I was too early. So some of my friends in the business world call me before early. So I was just too early. And you got to have a sense of you make fun of yourself. So now's the time for all of the things you're describing. Probably the best outcome would be a foundation or a rich family office to fund some of this because I'm dealing with startups, folks. I'm dealing with people who have an idea and they're building and they have volunteers. I just connected this one. We're going to focus a lot on India. India has extreme pollution, worse than when I was in Delhi in 1996 when the inside of my nose was black. I was looking at the New York Times today. They have the Taj Mahal and you barely can see it. The pollution's gotten worse in India. Why is it worse? Because they're burning more coal. The key is the technology solutions are only a piece of this. The financial solutions are only a piece of this. I still look at human behavior as being the hardest, the heaviest lift of this, because that's really where we have to go.
Talk to me about decarbonization, as in, I understand that China is the biggest investor in solar by far, like twice as much as the United States, and then like probably 10 times as much as everybody else combined. And yet still they're firing up more coal than ever before,
Yeah.
right? So I don't get it.
Well,
I
the
don't
Chinese
understand.
don't make any sense to me. And I've been to China 3 times. They burn 80% coal burn, and they lie about their statistics. It could even be more than that, metallurgical coal or industrial coal. So they burn a lot of coal, and yet they're the largest deployer of clean energy. Hello, that doesn't make sense to me at all. And they're still burning the coal. India, which has a country with tremendous capacity in engineering at IIT, just tremendous, brilliant, and still it's worse than when I was there 30 years ago. It's worse. So this was the dirty little secret. One of my books when I was doing some research is called Energy Hedging in Asia. And then I learned, ironically, Japan never had a coal plant before 1988. They have coal plants. Vietnam has coal plants. Pakistan has coal plants. India, Thailand, they're all building coal plants. Now, where are they getting the coal from? Indonesia and Australia. So there's been a build out of coal fired capacity in Asia. It's a terrible mistake, literally. So you can deploy a lot of renewables, but if you're still combusting coal, which is pretty awful because of particulate matter, PM2.5, and the environmental degradation and the human health issues are horrible, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, here in the United States, ironically, we used to burn 55% coal. We now burn 15% coal. We've phased out coal due to economics. We don't burn coal in America. We burn no oil in America for power generation. None, zero. So we've shifted in the US from environmental law and economics. And that took 1978 to now, so it's almost 50 years, but it happened. So the US is number 2 in renewables, despite all the nonsense what Trump's talking about. Number 2, number 1 oil and gas producer in the world, more than the Saudis, and growing. And also number 2 in clean. So it's kind of like we're doing all this too. The Chinese, it's befuddling because they're very smart. They study things. I met the head of Tsinghua University. It's the MIT of China. And I don't understand the disconnect. We also did a capstone at Columbia, Chinese students working on emissions trading in China, which that was like 2015. So they were very slow on even launching that market to reduce carbon emissions. So we got some big problems. The world is combusting more fossil energy, more. Emissions are growing faster, and yet we're deploying more renewables. So I could call this the great dichotomy. But if you go to the EU, it's fairly clean. If you come to the US and Canada, it's fairly clean. If you go to Japan, it's fairly clean. But other countries, I mean, I've been to Singapore and you couldn't see the sun. You couldn't see the sun because they were burning peat in Indonesia, and they call it the haze. They didn't want to call it pollution. It was the haze. And for days, I could not see the sun. So we've got some serious problems.
So can we double tap into the economics. And I let's leave capital aside because, as you mentioned in your TED talk, there's a lot of money on the sidelines. But one elephant in the room we didn't touch on is regulation and sort of did you say the economics? So there's a certain maybe incentive that doesn't exist for the Indian government. And so it's the easiest going back to, because I studied psychology. I'm an organizational psychologist. I have a master's in psychology. So and in organizational psychology, you look at like how like human behavior inside a company. And you mentioned that the human factor is the hardest to change. I'm also a Buddhist practitioner since seven. And as you can see, I'm not enlightened. So like it's the human mind is the slowest of them all to change anything, right? It's like this law of physics. If there's no force affecting an object, then it will just continue its pathway. And it's like, how from the inside out can I change the trajectory of my life? And how can I have this wish to change it? Be that health, diet, like relationships, like what mental health, finance, whatever. So there's a lot of coaching around that, right? So, but let's talk about for the layman a moment about these economics. I'm actually surprised and positively surprised to hear that the States is not, and I mean somebody can fact check that and everything, but there's no oil burning for electricity. There's a lot of clean and so on and so on. And the media picking up amplifying everything that the president says is not very helpful. So anyway,
This is a rogue administration. Look, I have been on New Delhi TV, Japanese TV, CNBC, CNBC Europe. I've been on all the TV channels, and there's a bias of negativity. Okay. And they used to be fact checkers. So there's no more fact checkers. They're all gone. So in the olden days, I was in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or the Economist, or FT. They said, Mr. Fusaro, did you say this? They don't do that anymore. So that's kind of the sad part of the internet. Anybody can put out any kind of lies, and they're lies, and they're not true. So Trump says, "Oh, we're going to burn more coal." We're not going to burn more coal. Everything he says is a lie. So you have to just forget. You have to just forget what's going on in Washington D.C. I'm going to give you a better analog. The state of California, where I've worked on AB 32, which is their climate change law, went from the seventh largest economy in the world to the fourth largest economy in the world. So this thinking that it costs too much for a cleaner environment is totally false. It created more jobs, and that was the regulatory structure. They sat down, the regulators, the Cal EPA, Public Utilities Commission, et cetera, sat down with what we call the interveners, the industry, and crafted rules that work. They have the best climate change law on the planet. They have energy storage, solar energy, and a growing economy.
So let's double tap onto the growing economy. Where does the growth come from if everybody believes that these prohibitive laws will just stifle growth and kill the engine and delete jobs?
This is the misnomer. So when I was 26 years old, I worked on taking lead out of gasoline. It was mandated by Congress. That was under the EPA. The EPA did not tell industry how to comply with the law. Okay, so the best public policy is set a goal and then step back and let industry innovate. So what happened was there were no gasoline shortages because engineers solved problems, and it worked. It just worked. That's what California did. Here are the rules. Innovate. Don't interfere. Don't pick technology winners. Don't interfere with markets. That's how it works. That's how it really works.
So I'm gonna go out on a limb here, but let's take the tariff hammer, and I'm joking, but what I wanna get to is what would be on a global scale, because I wanted to talk to you about geopolitics. Like they say, I'm a big fan of Niall Ferguson, and I hope I can get him on the podcast at some point. And so for some time, I was afraid oh, everything is going to change. United Nations is not going to work anymore. All this world order that I've grown into, I was born 85, so now, yeah, it's going to change. It's going to fall apart. Nation states are going to change. Like what's going to come next, and so on. And then how do capitalists and investors even invest if there is no long-term stability? And so I was really confused. What would how could the experience from California be scaled across the US and then be scaled across India and China? What would be some mechanisms how that could work,
Well,
even if it takes 40 years?
well, first of all, in the blue states where I live, it's already happening. New York State has a Green New Deal, and it's creating jobs. And we have a wind industry in New York that is getting fits and starts, but it's going. So with public policy, and this is where it changes for me because I've always been international. So now I've got to go state and local. I'm just going to be blunt. I mean, I've worked for 3 presidents and advised every president up to Trump. Just going to be blunt. So I can't work with nonsense. So I kind of know the mechanisms, and I'm talking the Pentagon, which has been very proactive on climate change. You wouldn't think so, but they are. They're very worried about their forward operating bases, about coastal installations. State Department, I work with USAID. World Bank, I work with the World Bank. Council of Environmental Quality. I have been to the rodeo. Right now, this regime is a rogue regime. So we've got a model called California and New York and other states. Ironically, 2/3 of the revenue in the United States is in the blue states, not in the red states. Like New York metropolitan area has a GDP larger than 80% of the world's countries. 80% of the world's countries. So for China and India, who have studied the United States model, and to be blunt, they're more authoritarian, so they could implement this. They haven't. Now, the problem is population size. They have huge populations. When China restructured, millions of people lost their jobs. And they've got some economic problems in China. Now, India is even worse. So you can have the best rules, but you have to have the long-term template. And so on the emissions trading, it was 10-year increments. First 10-year reduction, second 10-year reduction, going up to 2050. That's how you have to have this done. Slowly, but with the rules. So then you take away regulatory risk. You know what the rules are, because you can't have outliers changing the rules in midstream. Business does not like that. They make investment based on long-term cycles, on return on investment, and they can't function this way. And so a lot of the stuff you're hearing in Washington isn't happening. It's not happening in the real world. These companies are not stupid. They are run by very technocratic entrepreneurs that understand capital markets. And they're beholden to their equity price, not what's going on in Washington. So there's just some disconnects here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So directionally, we're all moving this way. India is aware of its environmental problems and is deploying more solar. Now, I'll tell you why we have more solar. Because solar became affordable. There was a 9% decline in the capex budget. So it went down. When you bend the cost curve, everything becomes commercial. Wind had about a 60% decline. Energy storage, batteries, same thing. As you decline, then it becomes globally dispersed. Other nations can afford to use the same technologies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where do you see? Let me be mindful of the time. Maybe I don't give you a last question, but maybe I will just end this slowly by saying, is there something we haven't touched on that you think should be worth mentioning as we are closing out?
No, I'll just reiterate. Things take time. So think long term. So that's patient capital, not 10x, 20x, which a lot of investors and VCs like. And this is the game of young people, young professionals who are going to inherit this world and who are going to have great wealth and will be in positions of power. So I see directionally this thing shifting. And I'll give you a bigger number. The number that Bloomberg New Energy Finance puts out for investment in this sector is $215 trillion. As I said earlier, only $2.2 trillion was invested last year. It was up 5%. So we're under investing. Energy is an $8 trillion business. Food is a $5 trillion business. Water is a $3 trillion business. These are businesses that are not going to have disruptive technologies. What I learned in grad school was incremental change. Things happen gradually.
Interesting. That could be the starting point of another session with you. Wonderful. Peter, it was wonderful. I thank you so much for reaching out on LinkedIn, because you joined Sean Lesser's The Real Mental Health Foundation as an ambassador. I'm very happy that you did, and because you are running the Wall Street Green Summit now, it's 26th edition. Am I right?
25th.
25th anniversary. So happy anniversary on that.
Thank you.
I encourage everyone to check that out. See if you can get a ticket for next year, or if you want to speak at the event, reach out to Peter. I'm sure you'd be happy to meet people and talk to them. And Peter, you're also running a CAP intro.
Yes.
Vehicles. Everybody who is building in that space, maybe check that out as well. And with that, I wish you a long and happy life, and also from a generational point of view, that you can pass on the baton, and that your work and your legacy will be living in these young minds. That is a wish with which I will conclude this conversation, and I will pass it on to you.
Yes, and that has already happened. So I'm seeing tremendous success with young men and women that I've mentored as interns or just straight out mentorship, or former students. They are doing fantastic things that, they're exceeding their mentor, which is wonderful. It is just wonderful and gratifying. And so I'm quite happy when you mentor hundreds of people and they're doing well. It's a good thing.
Wonderful. Peter Fusaro, thank you for your work, and thank you for being on this podcast.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.